up, up and away. President Trump takes off on his first foreign tour, but there's no chance of leaving his troubles and his attempts to deflect them behind.
If there is evidence mounting that there might have been efforts to obstruct justice, that would be a parallel back to Nixon, and that would not look good for the president.
Tonight, as fresh revelations about Russia and the man he sacked as FBI boss, who he apparently told the Russians was a nut job, engulf the Trump White House, we ask whether he can keep his presidency on the road. Jeremy Corbyn's right-hand man today made the bold claim that Labour can win the election. We asked the Shadow Defence Secretary what that would mean for protecting the country. The little boy who witnessed the horrific murder of his mother, Rachel Nickell, 25 years ago, tells his story of the trauma he suffered that day and since.
All of a sudden, we saw this man lunging forward with a black bag over his shoulder. And then, everything just happened. In a matter of seconds, I was grabbed, thrown to the floor, my face dragged across the mud. And, seconds later, my mother collapsed next to me.
And Newsnight's own battle bus ventures to the part of the country shunned by the election circus.
Don't get much buzz around here.
No, that's why we're here.
Oh, right.
This evening, Donald Trump left Washington for his first foreign trip as president. 8 days away, visiting 5 countries, including Saudi Arabia and Israel. Often an outing on the global stage is an opportunity to draw the heat from domestic travails. But in Trump's case, there's no chance of a let-up back at base in a week where it is felt that perhaps the tectonic plates shifted definitively in the ever-developing scandals over Trump's dealings with the Russians and his battle with the FBI. Tonight, 2 separate stories which threaten fresh turmoil for the president. Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, is here. Mark, what's been happening?
Well, no sooner had the president's plane taken off than 2 new bombshells were dropped by the Washington Post and the New York Times. The Washington Post saying that the FBI investigation into possible collusion with Russia in the election period was gathering pace and had a new person of interest who was a serving member of the White House staff close to the president. That's the paper's story. People speculating on Twitter, some of them quite informed reporters, that is none other than Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president. Of course, we don't know that, but that's the speculation that's going on right now. This is the fever pitch. The New York Times story, if anything, even more damaging for the fortunes of the Trump White House, saying they have a minute now, a written record of that meeting with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, at the end of last week, in which, extraordinarily, President Trump is quoted as saying that Comey, the director of the FBI, who he'd just sacked, was a nut job, that he was putting him under pressure over Russia, and now that's taken care of. Well, that does feed those who say this is obstruction of justice in the case they're trying to make.
You wonder if Trump actually knows that minutes are being taken in these meetings, but the pace of this is ever increasing. So where is it headed?
Well, I think you can look at this and you can say there's a sort of by-the-book answer, and people understand the processes involved if this is going to come to some kind of formal legal charges, if it's going to get to impeachment even. And with impeachment, the House of Representatives have to vote for it. And I think a lot of the calculation up to now has been, well, until the midterm elections late in 2018, that's not even a possibility, because obviously the Republicans control the House of Representatives. Would they really vote for impeachment of their own president? But the pace of it now, these last 2 weeks, is causing some people to reassess that, ask, well, if real hard evidence is produced by the FBI or the other investigations on the Hill, will support crumble? And will this become more and more like that defining presidential scandal, Watergate?
All the president's men made bringing down Richard Nixon seem like the most romantic of adventures, particularly if you're a journalist. Now many in Washington see the parallels, talk breathlessly of impeachment as they watch Donald Trump's legal difficulties multiply.
If there is evidence mounting that there might have been efforts to obstruct justice, that would be a parallel back to Nixon, and that would not look good for the president. The other thing that I would look for are whether the special counsel is going to bring charges. If we do know that there are ongoing criminal investigations coming out of this counterintelligence investigation, which is also going on, that's kind of not typical. Usually you don't see a lot of prosecutions coming out of a counterintelligence investigation. So depending on where those go and who's implicated, that might spell trouble.
Early this week, it emerged the president had briefed the Russian foreign minister with highly sensitive intelligence. Then it leaked that the FBI director sacked 10 days ago penned a memo accusing the president of pressuring him to drop investigations into fired advisor Mike Flynn. And then on Wednesday night, the Justice Department appointed a special counsel to investigate the Trump campaign's ties to Russia, prompting claims of a witch hunt.
No president of the United States wants a special counsel appointed. In the case of President Clinton, where he had an independent counsel, of course, that led to Whitewater and eventually to Monica Lewinsky. And with President Ronald Reagan, you had a situation where there was the arms for hostages situation that had taken place that really tarnished the end of President Reagan's term. So no president of the United States wants a special counsel appointed. The question is, was there an underlying crime in Mr. Trump's case that warranted such an appointment?
And so the Watergate analogies begin. The special counsel claims of obstruction of justice, and Trump's political enemies talking impeachment.
Key to the drama of Watergate was the character of Deep Throat, reputedly a deputy director at the FBI, who guided the reporters at underground assignations towards their quarry, the president. Well, that's one of the similarities with today's situation, although now you could say there are differences too. There are so many Deep Throats and so many reporters pursuing Trump that according to your prejudice, you could say that's a sign of the resistance at work, or of a deep state, a conservative establishment trying to thwart his program of radical change.
Now we've seen the deep state working around the clock, undermining.
The president's backers paint what's happening as the revenge of a deep state against a president elected on a platform of radical change.
You have instance after instance where it's just not coincidence, it's fact that people are leaking classified information to try to harm the Trump administration. You can have your own political agenda, just put your name in front of it and then actually leak it with your name attached and then get arrested for it.
The president, like Nixon, likes to refer to a witch hunt. But how far is it now from impeachment? The case against Trump of collusion or obstruction of justice is not yet proven, but ultimately the judgment of his party is critical, and for that you have to look to Congress and count the votes.
Evidence against him doesn't have to meet the standards to actually prosecute him in a court. So there's a little bit of fudge room there, and it really depends on the support that he has. The House would have to vote to impeach. The Senate would have to vote to remove him. And those are really political issues and will depend on the amount of support that he has.
President Nixon chose to resign before it came to an actual impeachment. But when he knew his party was slipping away. Trump may not go so easily, but all eyes will now be on the party and whether support starts to crumble.
Mark Urban, we're joining us from Washington is journalist James Fallows, who started his career covering Nixon's fall in Watergate and went on to become chief speechwriter to President Carter. He's now the national correspondent for The Atlantic. Good evening. Thank you very much, James Fallows, for coming in. First of all, let's deal with that New York Times story that Trump told the Russians that Comey was, the removal of Comey ended the pressure on him. He then went on to call him a nut job. But I wonder if you think there's a danger in here for Trump and a possible obstruction of justice.
Well, certainly, you know, the suspicion in most cases like this is you find some subtle clues of obstruction of justice and the president doing things because there's some three-domino effect that it will reduce pressure on him. Trump is outright saying, according to these reports, which have not been denied, that this was the reason he got rid of FBI Director Comey. So this is, yes, in any normal political environment, this would be serious trouble for a president.
But you say in any normal political environment, so you're not sure.
Yes, and I think that the commentary you were having in this last package was right in that there are legal inquiries underway, but fundamentally this is a political decision. So far, a major difference between this episode and Watergate, apart from the speed with which things are unfolding, is that back 40 years ago during Watergate, there were a number of members of the president's Republican Party who were willing to say, wait a minute, what principles are being violated here? What about the Constitution, et cetera? So far, there's been some hand-wringing and concern from members of the Republican Party, but none of them have actually voted for subpoenas, investigations, et cetera. So that is a difference.
But let's now turn to the Washington Post, that there's someone, a senior White House official, someone close to the president, speculation is that it's Jared Kushner, who is now a significant person of interest in the inquiry into links between Russia and the Trump campaign. Is this just another small stoking of the fire, or is this important?
Well, this does remind me of the actual Watergate in that news unfolded each day and you didn't know where it was going to lead. There are two uncertainties here. One is exactly what person of interest means, whether that's somebody who they're looking at as a possible suspect. The other is whether we're talking about Jared Kushner, we're talking about Steve Bannon, somebody who is close to the president and still on his active duty service. So it could be a week from now we're looking at this as the domino which did move things. It could be that some other thing will have occupied our attention. So I don't know, but it is potentially interesting.
So these stories, both of them came out as soon as Trump was wheels up, leaving for a foreign trip, which might suggest that the papers are, as it were, engaged in some kind of warfare with the president. And there's not quite so much the deep state, but just the media generally is out to get him. What do you think about that?
My guess is that if either of these publications had the material ready to go 3 hours earlier, they would have used it then. Right. You could say this is the deadline for a daily paper, but it is 24-hour news cycle now. So I think it's just when they had the facts, they went with it as soon as they could.
Does that suggest that even though when he's away, there actually may be more dripping out in the next couple of weeks? He's away now for 9 days, 5 days, 9 countries. How embarrassing will this be to me abroad, or not so?
Well, it is traditionally true of presidents that when they go overseas, it makes them look stronger and more confident. It's hard to see exactly how that can work for Donald Trump. Number one, he is not well experienced internationally, as your viewers know. Number two, it's some tricky places he is going, Saudi Arabia and Israel in particular, and also the Vatican. Number three, whenever things get dicey, his implication or his impulse has been to lash out via Twitter or whatever else. Maybe he's under tighter Twitter discipline when on Air Force One, but I know firsthand there's Wi-Fi on there, so he can presumably grab his phone. So I think that the clock or the momentum of these revelations is likely to continue even as he is overseas.
James Pham, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Throughout the election, Newsnight is embedding in the Cumbrian constituency of Barrow and Furness to capture close up how the campaign looks from the perspective of one key marginal seat. Barrow's Labour majority of 800, a UKIP vote of 11% in 2015 and a 60% vote for Brexit all make it high on the Tory target list. John Woodcock, whilst campaigning under a Labour ticket, is one of the party's most outspoken critics of his leader, Jeremy Corbyn. So how's that all playing in the seat? This week, our filmmaker Nick Blakemore spent time with the main contenders.
We just hear it on the doorstep, time and again, people saying, well, yeah, we've always been Labour, but we're worried about you nationally, and we don't know what to do. The national election is going to be decided. It is going to be decided elsewhere, and it's going to be decided in favour of another Tory government. They have called it because they know they're going to win. And so, who do you want locally? And I mean, James, what is your sense of going out over the last few days?
There's maybe an 80-90% chance that they're sticking with us, but there's that remaining 10% that either aren't sure or they're swinging away from us.
I feel it is not as high as 80 or 90% actually.
Hello, I'm Simon Fell. I'm the Conservative candidate.
I do apologise for being in my...
That's quite all right.
You kind of just picture Theresa May of a morning setting off to go to Parliament on the A590. She'd never get there.
She wouldn't.
She would never get there, would she? And something would be done about it because it'd be in her backyard.
No.
And this is what I think it's very frustrating for everybody, because it always, you know, and it's not sort of not to you or anybody else, but we just always feel that this part of the country is just, like I say, just get everything palmed off, the dirty work, you know, the construction and this. Just have it up there, just tuck them away.
Okay, let's move over. Can we move? Are you rolling?
Yep.
A Tory nodding dog won't be there for you. A Tory nodding dog won't be there for you when it matters. My record shows I've always put you first. Please re-elect me on 8th of June.
Okay, one more time.
Yep.
And I may just nail it.
Are you campaigning on the manifesto, John?
So any discussion of Labour's manifesto, it is actually sort of slightly artificial, because it can show what our values are as a party, but when people understand actually that the Tories are going to win nationally, they view it in a different light.
There. 2A.
It's her policies on education I don't like.
Okay.
I don't like the way she's putting pressure on the kids, and she's increasing that.
So in terms...
This is Theresa May.
Mm-hmm.
Justine Greening, the Education Secretary, you know, she is a comprehensive girl. You know, this is the job she's wanted all of her life. I think now we're going to see a bit of a shift towards, you know, the priorities she's after.
We had in Cameron the heir to Blair, and we now have in Theresa May someone who's recognised as a tough leader who will knuckle down and get the job done. And her brand of conservatism is really different. You know, it is, you know, she wants to turn us into the Workers' Party, and she means it.
What makes you qualified to represent Barrow and Furness in Parliament?
It's where we go shopping.
Your business is in
Coniston, yeah.
So you don't live in the constituency?
No. I've actually put a bet on the punter. Who's going to get sacked first, Corbyn or Woodcock by Corbyn?
One horse race, Alan, I'm afraid. And it's frightening.
I think Nigel Farage is the most honest man I've seen in politics for a lot of years. Prior to that, well, Enoch Powell, arguably, he was not afraid to hold his line, even though the rest of the world was crashing around him. They're very few and far between.
Hello Simon, how are you?
Very well, thanks.
How's the campaign going?
Well, thank you. We've got the Secretary of State with us to discuss issues on the rail station, but also the A590 and the A595.
Yeah, I've been up looking at roads all across Cumbria, both up in Copeland and down here in Barrow, and clearly a number of things that need doing, including the A590. Probably can't spend the next 10 years going through a farmyard.
Okay, just a little further forward. That's fab.
In Barrow, there are a higher than average proportion of people on disability living allowance or living with disabilities, and they feel that under a Conservative government they have been made to suffer.
We don't want to do anything else but support those people with disabilities who need that support. But it is reasonable that when people receive a benefit, that they should have been properly assessed as to whether they are the right people to receive that benefit.
Okay, thank you. Simon, just on to you. It's been almost 25 years since there's been a Conservative MP in Barrow.
Will anybody from the Shadow Cabinet be coming to your constituency to support you?
Well, I'd be delighted if they did. One thing that I know that I've had really good support from Cat Smith, who is a valiant Shadow Cabinet member for younger people. She was born in Barrow.
Right, first of all I'd like to thank you all for attending. It's a pretty miserable night out there. To my left, far left, I have Andy Fury from London and John Woodcock, who is the parliamentary candidate and ex-MP for Barrow.
Technically ex-MP, to be clear, because there are no members of Parliament. Very much hoping to continue. Anyway, sorry, don't let me interrupt you.
This is the community coming together to show that we want to save the post office, and through all of the national stuff, you know, who's going to be Prime Minister, you know, this is what politics is about. I would have been happy if this general election had been called in 2020 as was planned. But now it's here. I am damn sure that we are going to make the issue of Ulverston's post office central to this campaign. I was actually put in Parliament to do right by my constituents, and that's what I've decided to do. We can't pretend to be something we're not. Actually, people can see through us, but what is important is that there are these Labour voices who will stand up for their communities.
Well, 5 candidates are standing for election in Barrow-in-Furness. Here they all are. Well, Barrow-in-Furness is a key centre for defence jobs, and we're going now to examine the Labour Party's position on defence and security. This week, their manifesto launch boosted Labour's poll ratings to the highest so far in the campaign. But defence, and in particular their position on Trident, has been an area of real tension within the party under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Nia Griffiths is the Shadow Defence Secretary, and she joins me now. Good evening, Nia Griffiths.
Good evening.
First of all, let's talk about this confusion over Trident. There was a line in the leaked draft manifesto: any Prime Minister should be extremely cautious about ordering the use of weapons of mass destruction, but it disappeared from the official version. Why was that?
Well, I think what's very clear in both the draft version that was leaked and the final version is that we are fully committed to having a Trident nuclear deterrent. And it's not appropriate to go into detail about exactly how and when you might use it in a manifesto. The point is that we have it, and a deterrent is there to be used.
So you have a deterrent, it is there to be used. So it is going to be part of a strategic defence review. Do you think that's a good idea?
We're very clear about the review. When we have a review coming into government, it is about exactly how we would spend money and what we would be doing, in what order we'd be doing it, what sort of timetable. What it's not about is actually questioning whether we would have a Trident nuclear deterrent, because we settled that last year.
Well, Emily Thornberry tonight on LBC seemed to suggest that actually it was possible that it could be scrapped as part of the strategic defence review. And indeed, Jeremy Corbyn has said too that it's part of this strategic defence review, and we know his own position on Trident is different from the Labour Party position. So, in a sense, Trident is not secure.
Well, with all due respect, Emily is not the Shadow Defence Secretary, I am, and we had a long meeting on Thursday at which we agreed the manifesto, and nobody has raised the issue of removing the Trident nuclear deterrent from our manifesto. That was agreed last year, that we would have it as part of our defence review that we had last year, as part of our national policy forum process.
Emily Thornberry said tonight, if you're going to have a review, a proper review, you're going to have a review. And a review, there's no point in reviewing Trident if you're absolutely committed to it.
Well, we are absolutely committed to it.
So therefore Emily Thornberry's wrong?
Indeed, because last year we looked at it, in particular at the National Policy Forum, and it was decided that we would keep the nuclear deterrent, and that was reaffirmed at our conference in September, as it has been many years.
We're 3 weeks from a general election. The Shadow Defence Secretary says there is no chance that Trident will not be with us. It is a firm commitment. The Shadow Foreign Secretary says everything's up for grabs, it's for review, and it's possible that it could be scrapped. So we don't know Labour's policy.
Well, I'm being very clear about Labour's policy because it's been reaffirmed year after year. We made a commitment back in 2007 to renew the Trident nuclear deterrent, and that is our position, and that is our commitment to our foreign allies, that is our commitment to our industrial workforce, and that has been reaffirmed year after year after year at Labour Party conference. And again on Thursday when we had the manifesto meeting, it was fully affirmed by the whole room.
So just let's be clear. This is a very serious time. This is not some kind of opposition conversation that's happening, 18 months out from an election. There's an election in 3 weeks' time. Jeremy Corbyn could be Prime Minister. We're going to have a strategic review where Emily Thornberry says everything's up for grabs. It could be that Trident, eventually, if it's going to be reviewed, scrapped. And yet the Shadow Defence Secretary doesn't say that. You weren't even at the manifesto launch.
I was at the manifesto meeting last Thursday, which is when we were actually looking at the detail of this programme. And as
so
I
was
say,
Emily Thornberry not listening?
Not one query was raised about the Trident nuclear deterrent.
Let's move on now. On Andrew Marr's show this month, Jeremy Corbyn was categoric. There will be no first use of nuclear weapons. So it's not a deterrent.
Well, I think it's very, very important that we have the deterrent, and that if you have a deterrent, then you are prepared to use it.
In first
use. Of course, you do everything else before, don't you? You have diplomatic means, you have conventional military means. Nobody in any circumstance would want to put nuclear as your first line of attack.
No, but nobody's suggesting for a minute that actually somebody's going to fire off a missile without giving it the most incredible thought. But what we're saying here is that Jeremy Corbyn said there'd be no first use. It's not a deterrent then. It may as well just be an expensive white elephant. Do you believe that you have to be prepared ultimately for first use if you have nuclear weapons?
You do have to be prepared. That might be the circumstance you may find yourself in the very uncertain world that we live in, and that's why it's absolutely essential that we keep that nuclear deterrent. But, as I have said, nobody would put that as the first item on their agenda. What we all need to be doing is making sure that we actually get in quickly to deal with problems so they don't escalate.
Well, let's turn now to NATO. Because there's a manifesto commitment to NATO. Is that the same NATO that Jeremy Corbyn was on record as calling a danger to world peace and a danger to world security?
We are fully committed to NATO. NATO is really the cornerstone of our defence policy, and it's even more important now when we're coming out of the European Union that we reaffirm that policy, and that we're also committed, of course, to the 2% spending commitment, 2% of GDP to be spent on defence.
Let's just say that NATO is called upon. For example, Russia invades Estonia, then the Britain is called upon as a NATO member to put military equipment and personnel in to resolve the situation. Jeremy Corbyn seems to be suggesting that we wouldn't necessarily, in certain circumstances, come to the aid of a NATO member militarily.
We are fully signed up to Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which says that, yes, we would put in that defence.
So he's wrong.
And yes, we would put in that military force. But of course, we all go through the other processes, which are also in that NATO treaty, of diplomatic means first. But yes, ultimately, you have to back up your defence and your support of your NATO allies with Article 5.
What we're saying now is that you say that if you're asked militarily to support, for example, Estonia, there'll be no question. Jeremy Corbyn is not saying that. So I'm going to put it to you. The Tories say that Labour's in chaos. 3 weeks on from an election, there's nothing graver than defence policy. We don't know, one, if there'll be first use of nuclear weapons, and two, we don't know whether militarily Britain will be prepared to come to the aid of another NATO country.
We are fully signed up to our NATO commitments, and that does include Article 5, and that does mean that if the threat were of that nature, then we would put in the military force. And of course, we support the enhanced forward presence, which is there in Estonia now.
Neil Griffiths, thank you very much. It's 25 years since a young mother, Rachel Nickel, was stabbed repeatedly and killed on Wimbledon Common in London. What made the murder even more shocking was that it was witnessed by her 2-year-old son, Alex. He was the only witness, and that put him in potential danger for the killer and changed his life completely. The combination of the need to protect Alex's identity and the intense and shocking media intrusion led his father, Andre, to take him to rural France and then to Spain to start a new life. Now Alex Hanscom has written a book which contains extraordinarily vivid detail of that day and tells the traumatic story of what followed. But most of all, Letting Go, a true story of murder, loss and survival, is a tribute to his mother, Rachel.
I remember everything, waking up, waving goodbye to my father as he drove off in his motorbike to go to work. I remember, walking hand in hand with my mother along Wimbledon Common, with Molly running around close to us, yes. And then as we ventured deeper into the trees, there was a section that was covered by trees. So all of a sudden, we both sensed that there was something in the air. So we both turned our heads to the right quickly, and all of a sudden we saw this man lunging forward with a black bag over his shoulder. And then, everything just happened. In a matter of seconds, I was grabbed, thrown to the floor. my face dragged across the mud, and you know, seconds later my mother collapsed next to me. And then I saw him disappear as I was lifting myself up from the floor still, because it all happened so quickly. Then he just disappeared into the distance, like it was a ghost, you know, disappearing. And I stood over my mother and I said, "Mommy, please get up." So she didn't move. So I was thinking, why doesn't she move? Why doesn't she respond? And then I said it again, "Mommy, please get up." And then it hit me, you know, right at that moment. I understood, I made that connection that she was gone and she was never coming back. So my heart was completely broken, you know. You feel that very physically in your heart.
So what kind of person was your mother?
For me, more than anything that she, you know, anything that we might have done together, what she looked like, what she smelled like, any of these things, is the feeling of being loved and of loving in return. That's something that will always be with me. And regardless of me losing her under these circumstances at such a young age, I've always felt so privileged compared to so many others who have never had that experience of being loved and of loving in return.
How did your father explain your mother's death to you?
So the fact that I was there, I'd already understood it all in my mind. There wasn't much for my father to say. But even so, when he came to collect me at the hospital, you know, as he had me in his arms, he said, "Your mother is gone and she's never coming back. But we're going to continue on together, you know."
One of the most intense moments when you went to the Common,
right,
supposedly privately,
yes,
with your father. And by this stage, the press were after you.
Yes. All the reporters that were on the other side of the fence realized who we were. So they all came jumping over the fence. My father had to cover my face with a baseball cap and try to run off as we were jostled, you know, from both sides, and the detectives tried to stop them from coming. And when we actually reached the spot, they put me on the ground, and we left the rose on the spot. And for several minutes, I stood watching my father as he was crying, you know, filled with tears. Meanwhile, my eyes were dry, and I was just standing there, you know, observing him.
Why do you think the press was so desperate to get to you?
The archetype of a young child with his mother, and him being there while his mother was attacked and witnessing all of that. I think there were so many elements that people identified themselves with that, you know, everyone was moved by the story. So the story blew up so much that, you know, the press is a business. We like to think that the press is some kind of news service, but the press is a private run business with their own agenda. So that was what served them as far as selling newspapers.
So then your father, out the blue, gets a call to say that they have another suspect.
Yes.
Robert Napper.
You and me would think that it's hard enough to get away with one serious crime, yet this person got away with over 100 attacks on over 80 women before he was finally apprehended.
Had they been efficient before, your mother would not be dead, and I wonder what you feel about the police behaviour.
What I feel about the police is everyone is going to make mistakes. You know, that's an accepted fact. That's just nature. But when you have a system where people aren't obliged to be accountable, to take responsibility for their actions, that's when you create dark corridors and you attract a certain person to that position which is more prone to incompetence, more prone to corruption. Because now what we have is the principle that because the police are well-intentioned, they shouldn't be held accountable.
In the book, you've made it clear that you forgive Robert Napper.
Yes. Once you've been through a difficult situation, it makes no sense to keep feeling pain, feeling discomfort every time you think about that event. So without condoning that person's action, that person's behavior, you forgive that person for yourself, so you can let go of that negative baggage of that you accumulate on your journey through life that doesn't serve you in any way.
Do you think she would think that you turned out well?
I know that she knows that I've turned out well.
Alex Hanscom, thank you very much indeed. It wouldn't be a general election campaign without a few dodgy media stunts. Reporters dressed as chickens pursuing party leaders, distinguished correspondents playing cards and eating curry with the electorate. Well, we do things rather differently here on Newsnight with our blackboards and uplifting graphs. Tonight we unveil our latest Reithian feature, which basically involves sending an old double-decker bus to parts of the country that never see a real battle bus or indeed much of the campaign at all. And what's worse, the unfortunate souls of these undercovered seats who are normally spared politics also had to put up with Stephen Smith.
They said there's an election on. Go out and bring us back a complete breakdown. And that's just what we did with the 1966 Routemaster double-decker. She's already got more than 2 million miles on the clock. We're rolling this baby into some of the safest or most overlooked seats in the country, ones that rarely get a visit from the party leaders and their charabangs. It's a special feature we're calling Battle Busted. We're bringing the Newsnight bus to the rolling constituency of Montgomeryshire in mid-Wales. It's one of the most rural and isolated parts of the country. It used to be a safe Liberal stronghold, but the Conservatives have held it since 2010 and they're expected to retain it. It's the only seat in Wales that Labour has never won. Oh, hello there. I'm on a creaking old vehicle that we're using to explore the general election campaign. But enough about the programme. What do you think of my bus? Any more fares? Oh! Who's driving this thing? Driver, have a word.
Hello.
Lembit.
How you
Fancy
doing, Steve?
fancy seeing you here.
Yeah, nice to see you. Yeah,
well, I was about to tick you off for rocking the old crate around, but now it's you.
Sorry
Who
about that.
better than to show me round this fabulous part of the world? Have you got a minute?
Oh yes, these streets can tell a few stories.
Come on, let's have a chat. When he was the Lib Dem MP here, Lembit Opik lived in the fast lane, dating a weather girl and then a pop star. He was seldom out of the limelight, but perhaps he attracted too many headlines for the locals because he lost in 2010. Tell us a bit about it for people who haven't been lucky enough to see this lovely green part of the earth.
It's a huge constituency, about 70 miles by 70 miles. Very few people here, more sheep than people, as you've probably seen.
And do you think that your former constituents will be excited to see our bus with its associations, I suppose, inevitably with the metropolis down here?
Some constituents will look at it and hope that this means there's finally a rural bus service from Llanidloes up to Carsws.
Well, we've got a bit of time. We could take a few maybe, but...
You'll need a lot of time and you could probably take the whole village. But in majority, they're a wily local population here. They'll look at this London bus and just assume you're very, very lost.
We asked people in the market town of Newtown whether they suffered a democratic deficit, overlooked by the politicians.
Well, we don't see an awful lot, that's very true around here. Yes, so you feel a little bit left out of things.
There isn't much election fever here on the face of it, and we wondered if people felt they missed out.
I'm not sure whether people are feeling that they're missing out. I think people may be feeling that in the middle of Wales they're being ignored.
Do you regret that they don't tend to come and see you here in this constituency?
Yes. We're in the backwaters here. We very rarely see them.
I'm interested enough in politics to be watching television and all that sort of stuff. I never even would expect them to come and see me anyway.
It was time to get back on the bus and resume a job very much fit for a grown man. Lembit was right. This is a big old patch. I once spent an entire election campaign in a motorway service station for this programme. But this time my billet was out in the fresh air of Montgomeryshire. People here vote as they have done for generations, putting their cross on the back of a sheep. Not really. These are young farmers learning to judge livestock.
Dear Mr. Judge, I place the Suffolk Ewes in the following order. Y, B, X, A.
Before they're judged in turn by their elders. There's no lack of appreciation for good speech-making here.
Seeing as I am 18 and I've got the chance to vote, I think I should have my just tick in the box to see.
You don't get much buzz around here.
No, that's why we're here.
Oh, right.
We've brought our Newsnight double-decker bus. Have any of you noticed it?
We did notice the bus, yeah.
Good effort on our behalf, or
Yeah,
not much?
a bad effort, that
Not
is.
bad.
Yeah, good show.
If you heard that Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn was coming to town tomorrow, would you turn out to hear them?
I wouldn't turn out to hear them, maybe get a selfie with them or something, but that's about it.
Join us again when we bring all the fun of the campaign to parts of the country that the election doesn't reach.
Well, that's all we have time for. Have a great weekend. Good night.